February 23, 1945. A single photograph captured a moment of triumph on the remote island of Iwo Jima. It's becoming one of the most iconic images in history. 6 U.S. Marines raising the American flag on Mount Suribachi symbolized victory, sacrifice, and the unbreakable spirit of a nation at war. But like many iconic images, the story behind it is far more complex, layered, and haunting than the single frame suggests. Today, we're going to peel back those layers, not just to understand the famous photograph, but to confront the brutal, often hidden, reality of the Battle of Iwo Jima and the Pacific War. Let's start with the photograph itself. What many people do and know is that this was actually the second flag raised on Mount Suribachi that day. The first flag, a smaller one, was raised earlier in the morning by a different group of Marines. A commander, wanting a larger flag that could be seen by the thousands of soldiers still fighting across the island, ordered it replaced. Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal arrived just in time to capture the second raising. He almost missed it. In his haste, he snapped the photo without even looking through his viewfinder. The result was a masterpiece of spontaneous composition, a perfectly timed shot that would win a Pulitzer Prize and be immortalized in bronze. But here's where the story takes a turn. The photograph was so powerful that it was immediately seized upon for propaganda purposes. It was used to sell war bonds, plastered on posters, and became a symbol of impending victory. The men in the photo, who were just ordinary soldiers doing their duty, were suddenly thrust into the spotlight. 3 of them, Harlan Block, Franklin Sousley, and Michael Strankwood, never see their newfound fame. They were killed in action on Iwo Jima within days of the flag raising. The surviving 3, Ira Hayes, Renee Gagnon, and John Bradley, were pulled from the battlefield and sent on a whirlwind tour across America to help raise money for the war effort. For these survivors, the experience was deeply unsettling. They were hailed as heroes, but they felt like frauds. They knew the real heroes were the ones who didn't make it home. Ira Hayes, a Pima Native American, was particularly tormented. He struggled with the fame and the disconnect between the celebrated image and the horrific reality he had witnessed. He couldn't escape the memory of the fighting, the friends he lost, and the fact that he was celebrated for a single moment while so many others had sacrificed everything. He descended into alcoholism and died tragically young, just a decade after the war. His story is a poignant reminder that the wounds of war are not always visible. The battle itself was a 36-day inferno. Iwo Jima, a tiny volcanic island just 8 square miles, was strategically vital. It held 3 airfields that, if captured, would provide a crucial base for American bombers to launch raids on Japan and a safe haven for damaged planes returning from missions. The Japanese commander, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, knew he couldn't stop the American invasion, but he was determined to make it as costly as possible. He transformed the island into a fortress, with miles of underground tunnels, bunkers, and hidden artillery positions. His strategy was simple and brutal: fight to the last man. When the Marines landed on February 19, 1945, they expected a fierce fight on the beaches. Instead, they were met with an eerie silence. Kuribayashi had ordered his troops to hold their fire, luring the Americans inland into a meticulously planned killing zone. When the trap was sprung, the island erupted in a storm of machine gun fire, mortar, and artillery. The volcanic ash on the beaches was so soft that men couldn't dig foxholes and vehicles bogged down, becoming easy targets. But the fighting was relentless, close quarters and savage. Marines had to clear the network of tunnels one by one, using flamethrowers and grenades in a terrifying subterranean war. The smell of sulfur from the volcano mixed with the smell of death. The casualty numbers are staggering. Out of 70,000 U.S. Marines who fought on Iwo Jima, nearly 7,000 were killed and over 19,000 were wounded. It was one of the bloodiest battles in Marine Corps history. For the Japanese, the toll was even more catastrophic. Of the estimated 22,000 defenders, only a few hundred were taken prisoner. The rest, following their commander's orders, fought to the death or took their own lives rather than surrender. This unimaginable level of sacrifice highlights a side of the Pacific War that is often misunderstood: the deeply ingrained Bushido code of death before dishonor. This wasn't just a military strategy. It was a cultural imperative that led to some of the most ferocious fighting of the entire war. But there is an even darker chapter to this story, one that the iconic photograph completely obscures. While the world saw an image of American heroism, atrocities were being committed. The nature of the fighting in the Pacific was fundamentally different from the war in Europe. It was a war often fueled by racial hatred on both sides. Dehumanizing propaganda portrayed the Japanese as subhuman, leading to a no-prisoners mindset among some American troops. There are documented accounts of Japanese soldiers who tried to surrender being killed. Furthermore, the practice of taking trophies, such as gold teeth or even skulls, from the bodies of fallen Japanese soldiers was disturbingly common. This is a deeply uncomfortable truth, one that complicates the simple narrative of good versus evil. It doesn't excuse the horrific war crimes committed by Imperial Japan, such as the Botan Death March or the Nanking Massacre. But it forces us to acknowledge that the brutality of war can corrupt even those fighting for a just cause. These acts were not official policy, and many soldiers were horrified by them, but they happened. They are part of the hidden history of the war, a testament to how extreme violence and racial animosity can erode our shared humanity. Historians like John Dower in his book War Without Mercy have meticulously documented this racial dimension of the Pacific conflict. He argues that understanding this is crucial to understanding the sheer ferocity of the battles. When your enemy is not seen as fully human, the rules of engagement change, and the capacity for brutality expands. Acknowledging this doesn't diminish the sacrifice and heroism of the soldiers who fought honorably. In fact, it makes their struggle even more profound. They were fighting not only a ruthless external enemy, but also an internal battle to hold on to their own morality in the face of unimaginable horror. So when we look at that famous photograph of the flag raising on Iwo Jima, what should we see? We should see the courage of the men who raised it, a symbol of hope in the midst of chaos. But we must also look beyond the frame. We must see the 36 days of hell that surrounded that single moment. We must remember the nearly 30,000 American casualties and the 21,000 Japanese defenders who perished on that small piece of rock. We must remember the survivors like Ira Hayes who were haunted by what they saw and did. And we must have the courage to confront the uncomfortable truths about the nature of that war, the racial hatred, the atrocities, and the moral toll it took on everyone involved. The photograph is not a lie, but it is incomplete. It's a snapshot of a much larger, darker, and more complicated reality. True remembrance isn't about glorifying war with simple, triumphant images. It's about understanding its true cost. It's about honoring the sacrifice of the fallen by acknowledging the full, unvarnished truth of their experience. The legacy of Iwo Jima is not just in the iconic photograph, but in the lessons it teaches us about the extremes of human courage, sacrifice, and the terrifying depths of our own brutality. It reminds us why we must strive for a world where such battles never have to be fought again. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the story behind one of history's most famous photographs. If you found this perspective valuable, please hit that like button, subscribe for more historical content, and share your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.